I've made no secret that Mega Man is my favorite video game franchise, and even among those legendary games, the X series may perhaps be the most esteemed. Of course, it is a little odd how wildly the X titles can vary in quality, having both some of the best titles and the worst. Being the real gamer that I am, I played through all the mainline X titles earlier this year, and since YouTube's algorithm loves a numbered list, I'm going to rank them all, from worst to best. A few things to keep in mind though. While I have played all the X games outside of the mobile ones, I'll only be doing X1 through 8 here, since it's been years for some of the games and I don't have video on the handhelds to boot. Also, this will be my personal list, with some of my personal experiences and biases thrown in, so if we disagree on a few of the placements, that's fine. Comments are open, just try not to be a jerk about it. Now, with that out of the way, let's get started. 8th on the list is, in my opinion, not just the worst X game, but the worst Mega Man game of all time, X6. And yeah, I know what you're thinking, and we'll talk about that one shortly, so please just hear me out for now. Whereas certain other entries tried something new and failed, X6 took what was great about the series and somehow turned it into garbage. The level design is trash. One stage has you hiding in cubbies while an avalanche goes past, holding you up while things continue to attack you without the room to dodge. One stage just has you fight the same, boring, sub-boss 5 times in a row, with variations on the arena, and another randomly chooses a set of hallways for you to navigate, so that you need to get lucky to find upgrades in it, to pull a few examples. That's on top of all of them being painted in enemies, which gives you very little breathing room, as well as being just so much visual noise. Attacks seem to do less damage to you in this one, so the creators might have been aware by how much stuff they were throwing at you, but this doesn't do much to mitigate the moment-to-moment frustration. The bosses are also pretty unreasonable, the worst offender being Hymax, who you have to tag with a charge shot to stun, then hit with one of the 2 special weapons that actually work to deal damage. This is not only unintuitive, but can also lead to a no-win situation if you happen to stumble across him before you clear the right levels. The game's story is also a mess, being poorly translated and several plot points being lazily waved away instead of properly explained, and this itself illustrates perhaps the game's worst point, that this was just a blatant cash grab. The series ended with X5, but I guess because Mega Man moves units, Capcom decided to do this one anyway. If the team had something they wanted to do with X and thus needed another sequel to accomplish that, well, it still would have felt kind of off. I would at least understand it. Instead, what we got was a game that felt half-baked and poorly designed, whose only purpose seems to be to capitalize off of a popular IP, and it spits in the face of everything that came before. While I still contend that this is the worst X title from just a gameplay standpoint, this utter disrespect should have been enough to qualify X6 for the bottom of the list anyway. Number 7, and second worst, is X7. What can I say about X7? They tried to make the transition to 3D, swapping between that and 2D sections throughout, and it just didn't work. Sometimes the physics act up, the character movements feel much slower and stiffer than the typical quick and precise way they did in the past, which even carries over in some of the side-scrolling sections. There's a lot of ideas that could have been neat but just weren't executed well, like the Ride Chaser level where you're better off scooting around rather than going fast, or the Cyber stage, where you get flipped to the underside of the level to progress at spots. Beyond that, the menus are awkward. Power-ups are largely obtained by rescuing Reploids, who can be permanently killed if you mess up. And you have to use the upgrades immediately between stages, you can't save them for later. And you can't play as X until you're significantly far into the game, and only if you're doing a good job saving Reploids. Let me say that again, you can't play as the game's titular character until you do a significant amount of work. End of the day, the game just isn't very good, but it's the boring type of not good. There are no hilarious bugs, no overpowered exploits. The story is awkward, but not so bad it's good. While a lot of people treat this like it's one of the worst games of all time, it's not, so there's not even the draw of letting your morbid curiosity have you play something truly horrendous. Instead, this is exactly the sort of game you would either never play, or would try 2 levels of and then never touch again. The only reason this game gets as much hate as it does is because it's part of the Mega Man franchise, which typically has a standard for quality. If it wasn't for that context, no one would have even heard of this game. While X6 makes me mad, I'm mostly just bored when I play X7. Oh, and so that no one can accuse me of forgetting, the English dub is of questionable quality, and most bosses just have a few vocal lines that they'll say over and over again. Burn, burn to the ground, burn, burn, burn to the ground, burn, burn. Next at 6 is X5, and this is where we start getting into acceptable territory, though players are kinda split on this one. While I'm personally not a fan, I can at least appreciate what Capcom was trying to do here. This was meant to be the finale to the series, and the team tried to stuff a lot in here, which, in my opinion, kinda weighed the game down. The game has multiple endings, and while you can put in some effort to affect your odds, what you get is largely RNG. The bosses level up throughout the game, so that the later you fight one, the stronger they are, but it seems to mostly give them more health, and making something a damage sponge is not a good challenge in my opinion. You get 2 sets of armor you can complete this time, which sounds fun, but rather than putting them together piece by piece, you need to get all the parts to assemble and use it. That makes it an all or nothing prospect and increases the need for backtracking, since you can't just get the piece you need to collect an upgrade. You do get 4th armor from the get-go though, which is pretty neat and feels almost broken. All of that though, I could overlook and call this a good, if a bit awkward game, but there's one thing, or should I say one person, that makes me really dislike playing this title: Alia. She serves as your guide and will constantly interrupt what you're doing for unskippable text boxes containing the most banal information. The worst was in the volcano level, where, when I got to a spot where I had to jump down, Alia told me that there was a wave of fire that would blast by and kill me if I wasn't careful. Very good information to have. Then I hopped down and was warned again about the flames that would pop up any second. Kinda just told me that. Then, as I spotted a hidey hole and leapt towards it, she stopped me again mid-dash, killing all my forward momentum to tell me that the spot I was already heading to was safe. And then I died. Luckily, you only get these explanations once, so retries and returns are much more pleasant, but it's still pretty bad. While it wouldn't be enough to affect how I rank the games, a simple option to turn her off would do wonders for X5. Number 5 is probably going to be my most controversial placement, and that's X2. I know, even I'm surprised. If I had to make this list before I started replaying stuff, based back on when I originally went through the games, this probably would have been 2 or 3. But my last few trips through, it just didn't click with me. It's weird because it does most of what I like from X games really well. The controls are good, the music rocks, the levels are well designed, and upgrades are hidden in places that either require skill to get to, are findable with careful exploration, or both. So what is it about this one? Well, Wheel Gator spends more time hiding than actively engaging. Crystal Snail will spin and be invincible for around 10 seconds if you miss the Magnet Bomb. The X-Hunters pop up before it feels like I'm ready for them and throw off the order I want to go through the stages, and then always seem to leave right when I'm ready to take out the last one, wasting my efforts. All of the bosses also seem to have more iframes than normal and just seem to feel more like a waiting game as opposed to a harrowing battle. Oh, okay. I think I answered my question. I'm not a fan of many of the boss fights, which is a big draw in Mega Man games. All that said, if I continue to practice these and get better at the fights, maybe even learn some cheese, I could see my enjoyment of this entry going up significantly. Heck, I actually did learn a way to take down one boss that made one of the Sigma levels go from taking around a half hour to an hour and knock it down to around 10 minutes instead, so I am working my way there. Who knows, give it a year and maybe my order for this list will change as I learn the ins and outs of things. The most important thing is that this is the first entry on the list that I actually like, even if my enthusiasm is a bit subdued. Number 4 is X8. After 2.5 terrible games, this was exactly what we needed. It returns to the side-scrolling formula that worked before, with a ton of collectibles, rather than a bunch of people to save that were easy to miss. It also takes the few things that X7 got right, like Axel, the chameleon ability, a return to the individual armor piece system, and being able to choose 2 characters and taking them into a level at once, even supplementing this by letting the operators be unlocked. They also added in some other video game tropes, like the chips you can make to boost your character, pretty much like a skill tree, and a new game plus that not only lets you carry over your unlocks, but also nets you some pretty cool bonuses, like the aforementioned playable navigators and ultimate armor. While we didn't need these things, they are kinda neat to mess around with and also give you a reason to keep playing. The story also does some interesting stuff, like using the chameleon ability to shake up the status quo, building on some plot points that were previously left hanging, and, most significantly, making this the only game outside of Command Mission where Sigma is not the final boss. I really like this game and am very tempted to play it one rank higher, but I do have to admit that there are some issues with it that prevent me from doing so. While the action is still 2D, the graphics are 3D and there are some parts where it's hard to tell what's in the background and what's in the foreground. While it's cool to have 6 characters to play, it often feels kinda dumb to choose anyone outside of X and Zero. It can be really hard to tell when the final boss is vulnerable and when they're invincible, which is frustrating. Some sections go on for a bit too long and require you to react to things that are off screen. The vehicle stages are a little rough. And the potential need for grinding in any Mega Man game, outside of the deck building ones, always feel a little off. The game is good, just a little rough around the edges, and has a lot of promising ideas, which is a good spot to be in when you've had a few stinkers in your series. Unfortunately, with the X game's diminishing reputation, this one didn't do so hot, and so it was the last one that came out. If they had just continued in this direction, refining some of the rougher spots, X9 could have been amazing, but instead, this is when the plug was pulled, rather than the game that was the intended final one. At least now, with the new compilations out, more fans can give it a try and see what they missed. Assuming, of course, they didn't just pick up the first collection. Number 3 is, appropriately, X3. This game is just really solid. It plays well, the boss designs are good, the stages are good. For music, it has 2 versions of the soundtrack, one for SNES and the other for PlayStation and Sega Saturn. I wouldn't say one's better than the other, which you prefer just coming down to mood, so it's pretty cool that we got 2. There's even some extra anime intros for each boss in the PS and Sega versions. While it's a shame they got rid of the Street Fighter Super moves, the one-at-a-time chip system they used to further upgrade one of X's armor parts, with the golden chip being the secret power-up, is neat. And while I didn't get the most out of the ride armors here, I still like them enough that I'm glad they're here. This game also set the stage for Zero being playable, albeit in a limited capacity, and there's a lot of neat secrets here, like getting Zero's Saber or killing Doppler stage bosses early with their weakness to change what you end up fighting in the final stages. The game is terrific and is better than most games in most other series, Mega Man or otherwise. I almost feel like I'm doing it a disservice by placing it at only 3 and like I need to explain why it's not higher, but all I can really say is that the top 3 are amazing and they only get more so as we count them down. Number 2 is X4, and that's maybe not just for the X series, but Mega Man as a whole. It is really stinking good. Seriously, there was a point where I was questioning whether it would manage to top the list, but my previous favorite still managed to hold its spot, although it's really close. The game has everything I love about the X series that I already mentioned, the bosses, levels, and controls. The 4th armor also might just be the first that has great functionality for each part, rather than one piece either being assigned as an ability just to fill a spot, or to just unlock other, better upgrades. It even has 2 different arm parts you can swap out, and while I always stick with the one, it's pretty cool that you're given a bit of customization, even if it is pretty minor. This is also the first game to include the Ultimate Armor, which has been in almost all the following ones. While I do wish you earned it as opposed to just tapping in a code for it, these suits typically look pretty spiffy and give good abilities like the Nova Strike, the first Giga attack I bothered using for reasons outside of getting an achievement. And while they experimented with the idea before, Zero is fully playable in this game, and I think X4 executes this better than any of the other entries. Rather than essentially just being a temporary power-up sort of thing, or just someone you switch to and maybe it affects the story if you used him to finish off the final boss, here Zero gets his own campaign and makes it so that going through the game with both him and X are worthwhile. With X, you have ranged weapons, he gets extra armor pieces, and each of the bosses have a visual cue when you hit them with their weakness, which I love. With Zero, you get different moves that require different inputs rather than weapon swaps and ammo, and his moves are more close ranged, making him a more technical character to use. I used to think that X was the easier one to play due to him having more attacks and being able to strike from a distance, and while I still think that's slightly true, after getting in some time with Mega Man Zero, the choices don't feel quite so lopsided, the red option just needing a bit more practice to use him efficiently. This also ties into the story beats, which have some anime cutscenes and some extra dialogue with bosses, giving them a bit more personality beyond just being obstacles to overcome. The X series has always had a bit more story than Classic, and they started to flesh things out more in X3, but here it feels like they really concentrated on it a bit more. And despite how much I clown on some of its dumber parts, I do love the plot here, especially with Zero. The story felt a bit heavier than the rest, and it's also reflected in the music, with some tracks feeling more somber and having more weight. That's not to say that there aren't some rocking and more energetic tracks. The OST just feels much more tailored to the individual stages than some of the other entries. And sure, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the less than stellar English dub, but given its meme potential and so bad it's good quality, it's both a minus and a plus. Beyond that, the game has a bunch of other little quirks that punch up the gameplay, like the stages that are a bit longer than normal without being too long, with appropriate checkpoints to boot, being able to take the right arm into the Magma Dragoon fight, and the game having perhaps the most learnable Sigma encounter in the series. What this leaves you with is a very high quality title. I'm constantly looking for excuses to replay this one. And number 1 is, of course, the original Mega Man X. This is my favorite game of all time, and with good reason. It took everything good with the Mega Man games and kicked it into overdrive. Everything I mentioned that I liked about the other titles on this list, this one does, to perfection. The bosses are iconic, the soundtrack, legendary. The controls feel second nature, the level design, impeccable. That's the X games in general though, so what sets this game apart? Why do I and so many others think that this one in particular stands above the rest and is the perfect game? Well, part of it is nostalgia, I won't deny that. This is one of the first Mega Man games I owned, and I played it more times than I can count. This was a large part of my childhood, and I'll always be thankful that it was. The game also gets bonus points for being the first. It establishes all of the tropes that come back in subsequent games. The intro stage, the charge special, the dashes, the wall climb, the weaknesses that cause a visual effect on the bosses. You're also able to take the story a bit more seriously, because when Zero and Vile die, they've never come back before, so you're able to actually believe that this might be it for them. Even if all these games had somehow managed to come out at once though, X would still manage to be a cut above the rest, because of all the little touches they added in. You find the dash boots naturally, and even if you miss the upgraded Buster, they still give it to you later, because those two functions were important enough to guarantee that you wouldn't miss them. Even though it's not their weakness, you can still use the Boomerang Cutter to disfigure Launch Octopus and Flame Mammoth. When you get to the Breach Submarine that drops mines on you, you can either take the obvious path beneath it, or climb on top of it to take it out. Beating some levels will affect others, like icing over Flame Mammoth's level by beating Chill Penguins, or Launch Octopuses causing flooding and Steam Chameleons, making everything feel interconnected. Rather than face Storm Eagle in an enclosed space, you face him on top of his ship, which is also the vehicle Vile retreats with in the intro stage. The Hodoken is a pretty cool bonus for getting everything else. If Sigma kicks your rear, you can just refill your sub-tanks with the respawning caterpillars you come across climbing back up to the boss fight, so it doesn't feel like you blew your only shot. The X series has some of the greatest games ever made, and yet somehow this first title manages to stay at the top through all of it. It's almost kinda disappointing to start off with the high point, yet the game is so good, how can you be upset? They really went all out with this one, and whether they intended it or not, one remains number 1. Greatest game of all time. That'll do it. My long-promised ranked list of all the mainline X games. While it was done from a personal standpoint, I largely stand by how I have them listed. There were a few curveballs though, so I'd love to hear your own order in the comments. At some point, I want to do the other Mega Man series, and I might even do some full reviews on individual titles, since my original draft had me talking about some of them for way too long. If that or just general Mega Man content appeals to you, perhaps consider subscribing, but for right now, I'd just like to say thanks for watching. I'm the Explosion, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.